A millionaire disguised as a poor man, and only a mother and her daughter help him. Ethan Ross stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city drown in golden light. Below him, Manhattan pulsed with life, cars streaming through the streets like veins in a sleepless body. Up here, in the top floor of the Ross Tower, silence was the only thing that breathed. He took a slow sip of whiskey, feeling the burn slide down his throat before fading into a false warmth. The glass, the city, the night, everything felt too perfect, too polished, too empty. The TV was on, but the voices were just noise, floating through the air like ghosts. Ethan Ross had everything, and that was the problem. At 40, he was one of the most powerful men in New York real estate. Dozens of skyscrapers carried his name. Magazines called him the man who could turn concrete into gold. But no one knew that every night, that same man sat alone in a penthouse so vast, even his breathing echoed back at him. Silence had become both his fear and his companion. His friends were business partners, his conversations were transactions. His phone never stopped ringing, yet not once did someone call just to ask, "Are you doing okay?" A few years ago, he had believed in love. Her name was Vanessa Cole, the woman who could light up a room with a single smile. He had given her everything, his time, his trust, his heart. He'd pictured the wedding by the sea, the mornings filled with laughter, the kind of life money couldn't buy. And then came that October afternoon. Vanessa had gone out. Ethan only needed her laptop to send a document, but instead of spreadsheets, he found messages, hundreds of them, soft words written to another man. And then the line that stopped his breath. Marry him, have the baby. Wait 2 years, then divorce. He'll never see it coming. Vanessa was pregnant, but not with his child. He sat there for hours staring at the screen until the words blurred through his tears. It wasn't anger that hit him. It was emptiness, the kind that hollows you out from the inside. The next morning, he canceled the wedding. No confrontation, no shouting. Vanessa cried, begged, said she was framed, that someone had faked everything. Ethan didn't say a word. He simply walked away, leaving the engagement ring on the counter, a glittering piece of metal, colder than his heart. From that day on, he disappeared into his own world. He worked, signed, built, invested, but he no longer lived. Each evening ended the same, returning to a home with no laughter, no warmth, no one waiting. Manhattan still glowed beneath him, a sea of light stretching into forever. But to Ethan, it looked like a maze, dazzling, endless, and painfully hollow. He wondered, if I vanished tomorrow, would anyone really notice? No answer came, only the faint whistle of wind slipping through the glass. And in that quiet, Ethan Ross finally understood. He was a man who had everything in the world, except a reason to stay alive. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The ticking of the wall clock echoed through the silence, each sound cutting into the still air like a reminder that time was moving. And he wasn't. He got up, walking barefoot across the long hallway. The golden light spilling from the ceiling made everything look perfect, almost too perfect, like a life staged for someone else. He stopped in front of the mirror. The man staring back wasn't the Ethan Ross he remembered. Tailored suit, tired eyes, a face that carried no life. The reflection looked expensive, successful, and completely hollow. Once he used to wake up excited for a new day. Now every night felt endless, every morning meaningless. Success had given him everything except a reason to smile. He looked deeper into his own reflection and whispered a question that hit harder than any deal he'd ever lost. Is there still real kindness in this world? Kindness with no agenda, no price tag, no expectations. Someone who would help just because they cared, not because he was Ethan Ross, billionaire. That question lingered, echoing in the corners of his mind. And when the clock hit 3 a.m., Ethan made a decision, reckless maybe, but necessary. He needed to know the answer. He opened his wardrobe, pushing aside rows of designer suits. In the far back, buried under dust, he found a pair of faded jeans, a gray hoodie, and old sneakers. He put them on, then looked at himself in the mirror once more. For the first time in years, he looked ordinary, invisible, free. He took off his Swiss watch, set his wallet, phone, and car keys on the table. Without them, he felt strangely lighter, stripped of everything except himself. When he stepped outside, the city air hit him sharp and cold. The streets were still half asleep, but the Brooklyn subway line was awake, humming quietly beneath the ground. Ethan boarded the train and sat among people he'd only ever seen through tinted windows, factory workers, students, an old woman clutching groceries. Everyone had a story, and for once, he wasn't the center of one. He was just another face in the crowd. When the train stopped in Brooklyn, Ethan stepped out. The streets smelled of cheap coffee and toasted bread. He wandered aimlessly until a flickering wooden sign caught his eye. The paint was peeling, the letters barely readable. Sonny's Corner Diner. He stopped. Something in him, quiet, instinctive, told him to walk in. Maybe, just maybe, inside that worn-out diner on a forgotten corner of the city, he would finally find the answer he'd been searching for his whole life. The bell above the door jingled as Ethan pushed it open. A wave of warmth hit him, carrying the smell of fried oil and burnt coffee. The diner was small, walls faded, ceiling low, light bulbs humming weakly above scratched metal tables. It was early morning in Brooklyn, quiet, half awake. A few customers scattered around, workers in uniforms, an old couple arguing softly, a truck driver sipping black coffee. Ethan chose a seat by the window. No one looked up, just another man in cheap clothes, invisible to the world. He folded his hands together and waited. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. The waitress at the counter was scrolling through her phone. A man in an apron clattered dishes in the back. Ethan raised his hand slightly. No reaction. He smiled faintly. In a tailored suit, people would rush to serve him before he even spoke. But now, in a gray hoodie and worn-out sneakers, he was air. 20 minutes later, a glass of water slammed down in front of him, splashing onto the table. "You want anything else?" the waitress asked flatly, eyes still glued to her screen. Ethan shook his head. "No, thank you." She walked away without another word. He stared at the drop of water rolling off the edge of the table and hitting the floor. Such a small sound, yet in that diner, it felt deafening. A bitter laugh rose in his throat. So that's how it worked. When you have nothing to offer, you simply disappear. He was about to leave when the bell rang again. A woman stepped in, holding the hand of a little girl with a pink ribbon in her hair. The woman looked tired, but gentle. Her coat was old, her shoes scuffed, her hands rough from work. She guided her daughter to a booth near Ethan's table. "We'll share today, okay, Lily? Just one plate of pancakes?" The girl nodded, smiling. "With lots of syrup, please." Ethan watched them quietly. They sat close, sharing a glass of water, exchanging soft smiles. There was nothing fancy about them, yet there was something real, something warm that he hadn't felt in years. Then the girl looked up and caught him staring. She tilted her head. "Mommy, is that man hungry like us?" Grace glanced over. Her eyes lingered on Ethan, a stranger in a faded hoodie, his face tired, his gaze distant but kind. She hesitated. "Maybe, sweetheart." Lily thought for a moment, then whispered, "Can we share with him?" Grace smiled softly. "If that's what you want." She stood, carrying the plate over. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I noticed you haven't ordered. We got a bit too much. Would you share it with us?" Ethan froze. He opened his mouth to refuse, but her tone left no room for pride. "It's okay," she added. "We mean it." He nodded, voice low. "Thank you. I appreciate it." They sat together. Lily grinned as Ethan picked up his fork. "You should eat before it gets cold." He cut a piece, the sweet syrup and butter melting together on his tongue, a taste so simple it almost hurt. In the soft yellow light, he saw Grace's hands, rough and cracked, the kind of hands that worked for everything they had. He saw Lily's eyes sparkle as she laughed over nothing. And for the first time in years, something inside him stirred, something tender, almost forgotten. When they finished, Ethan reached for his wallet, but the waitress said, "She already paid for you." He froze again. Outside the window, Grace knelt to tie Lily's shoelace, smiling as the little girl spun in her pink ribbon. Ethan Ross, the man who owned towers and cities, stood there speechless, watching them disappear into the crowd. And in that moment, over a $3 plate of pancakes, the first crack formed in the walls around his heart, and through it a single beam of light began to shine. Ethan stayed in the diner long after the woman and her little girl had left. The water in his glass had gone still, a thin trail of condensation sliding down the side and pooling on the table. Outside, the Brooklyn sky was a dull gray, slowly softening as morning light began to push through the clouds. He didn't know why he couldn't bring himself to leave. Maybe it was the faint smell of pancakes still lingering in the air. Maybe it was the echo of that little girl's laughter still somewhere in his mind. But deeper than that, it was the feeling of being seen. For years, Ethan had grown used to looks of admiration, envy, or calculation. But the way Lily had looked at him, curious, genuine, unfiltered, it was something else. And Grace, the way she had offered him half her meal with quiet sincerity, as if sharing was the most natural thing in the world, it cracked something open inside him. For the first time, someone had treated him like a person, not a name, not a bank account. When Ethan finally stepped outside, he stood on the sidewalk for a long time. The street was already waking up, buses rolling, people shouting, but he didn't move. The city felt different now, like a place he was seeing for the first time. He shoved his hands in his pockets and started walking. The air was cold, sharp, almost cleansing. All day, he couldn't get them out of his head. Grace, with her tired smile, and Lily, with her pink ribbon and bright eyes. A $3 breakfast that cost them more than he could imagine, yet they gave it away without hesitation. That night, back in his penthouse, he turned on the lights, but the room stayed dark. The whiskey glass on the table remained untouched. He sat in silence, hearing echoes, the clatter of forks, the laughter of a child, the simple sound of kindness. That ordinary breakfast had undone him completely. Why did she do it, he wondered. She didn't know who he was. She owed him nothing. She had little herself, yet she shared. That kind of kindness, the kind that asked for nothing in return, was something he hadn't seen in decades. His throat tightened. He stood and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath him, glittering and indifferent. But somewhere out there, among millions of strangers, two people had reminded him that the world wasn't as hollow as he'd thought. Right there, Ethan made a decision. He would find them. The next morning, before sunrise, he put on the same gray hoodie and left the penthouse. The air was crisp, the streets almost empty. He went straight back to Sonny's Corner Diner. The bell rang as he pushed the door open. The same waitress was wiping down a table, humming faintly to a song on the radio. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know the woman who came in yesterday with the little girl? Her name?" The waitress squinted at him. "She's here most mornings. Name's Grace. The kid's Lily. Do you know where they live?" She shrugged. "Somewhere around Brownsville, near the elementary school." "Why? You some kind of social worker?" Ethan smiled faintly. "No, just someone who owes her a thank you." He walked out, the corners of his mouth still lifted in a half-smile. But inside, something deeper stirred. Not curiosity anymore, but purpose. He needed to find them, not to repay the kindness, but because he knew deep down that without them, his life would slip back into the same gray emptiness. Brooklyn was waking up as he walked. The sunlight spilled through the narrow streets, touching his face with warmth. He pulled his hood over his head and kept walking, unaware that this simple search, this quiet morning, would lead him toward the greatest change of his life. Morning sunlight spilled across Brooklyn, painting the streets in shades of gold. Ethan walked with his hands in his pockets, heart steady but restless. He wasn't sure what exactly he was looking for, maybe a thank you, or maybe something deeper. All he knew was that since meeting that woman and her little girl, the silence of his penthouse had become unbearable. He passed rows of hanging laundry swaying between brick buildings, the scent of detergent and city air blending together. A grocery owner waved cheerfully at customers. A busker played guitar on the corner. Brooklyn felt alive, raw, imperfect, real. Near Public School 28, he stopped. Children were laughing by the gate, mothers sipping coffee and chatting while waiting. Ethan ducked into a small flower shop across the street. "Excuse me," he asked, "do you happen to know a woman named Grace, mid-20s, usually with a little girl, pink ribbon in her hair?" The florist smiled. "Oh, Grace Miller. Yeah, she lives right over there, end of that block, third apartment from the corner. You'll see her window. She's got these cute little flower pots hanging outside." Ethan thanked her, his pulse quickening. He crossed the street, stopping in front of a weathered 3-story building. The paint was peeling, the iron railings rusted. On the second floor, 3 small pots, 2 lavender, 1 rosemary, swayed gently in the breeze. He smiled. The narrow wooden stairs creaked under his steps as he climbed. When he reached the door marked 2B, he paused. From inside came the sound of laughter, the faint smell of something sweet baking in the oven. He knocked softly. Tiny footsteps shuffled closer, then the door opened, just a crack. Lily peeked out, her wide eyes lighting up in surprise. "Hey, you're the man from the diner," she squealed. "Mom, the man from the diner's here." Grace appeared, her hair tied loosely, a whisk still in her hand. For a second, she froze. "You're Ethan," he said quickly, offering a small smile. "I came just to say thank you. What you and Lily did that morning, it meant more than you could imagine." Grace set the whisk down, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked a little embarrassed. "It wasn't much, just what anyone should do." Ethan glanced around the small apartment. White walls dotted with children's drawings, a second-hand wooden table, sunlight spilling across the floor. The air smelled of cookies and coffee. Warm, real, lived in. It felt more like home than anything he'd owned. "Would you like something to drink?" Grace asked. "We just baked cookies." "Thank you," he replied, taking a seat at the table. Lily hurried over with 3 small plates, carefully setting one in front of him. He took a bite, crisp edges, soft inside, perfectly balanced sweetness. "These are amazing," he said sincerely. Grace smiled, eyes bright with quiet pride. "It's my mom's recipe. I bake online orders, helps pay the bills." They talked through the morning. Grace told him about her work, long shifts at the diner, late nights baking, her dream of someday opening a small bakery of her own. Ethan listened, truly listened, feeling every word. It was a world of small victories and quiet resilience, something he'd never known. When Lily ran outside to play, silence settled between them. Ethan looked at Grace and said softly, "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me more than you realize." She smiled faintly. "We just shared breakfast." He shook his head. "No, you reminded me what it means to be human." The words hung in the air. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting gold over her hands as she held her cup of coffee. Ethan watched her, and deep inside, something began to grow. Something fragile and tender, something he hadn't felt in years. The afternoon light poured gently through the small kitchen window, bathing everything in a golden hue. Ethan sat quietly, hands around his now cold coffee, watching Grace clear the table. Lily was on the floor with her coloring book, humming softly, her tiny legs swinging. The scene was so peaceful that it made Ethan's chest tighten, as if he were witnessing a kind of life he'd never known. Grace finished the dishes and sat across from him, drying her hands on her apron. "So, what do you do for a living?" she asked, her voice soft, hesitant, as if unsure if she was allowed to ask. Ethan smiled faintly. "Real estate, construction, investments, dry stuff." He paused, then added quietly, "But lately I'm not sure I want to keep living that way." She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "I used to think money could fill any emptiness," he said, "but it only makes the echo louder. You know, I can buy anything I want, except the kind of peace you have here." Grace smiled sadly. "Peace doesn't come easy, Ethan. It took me years to hold on to it." Her voice softened, low and steady. "I've done all kinds of jobs: cashier, waitress, delivery. When Lily was born, I had to do it all alone. Her father left as soon as he found out I was pregnant. My mom was sick then. We barely survived, but she always said one thing: never let poverty take away your kindness." Ethan said nothing, but the quiet tremor in her words sank deep into him. "She passed 3 years ago," Grace continued, her eyes distant but warm. "I still remember how the house smelled of cookies every morning. She'd always give the first batch to our old neighbor. She used to say, 'The best cookies are the ones you share.' I guess that's why I couldn't ignore you that day at the diner." Ethan turned away, swallowing hard. He suddenly understood. That morning, Grace hadn't just shared food. She'd shared a piece of her mother's legacy. "Have you ever thought about opening your own bakery?" he asked after a pause. Grace let out a small laugh, light but tinged with disbelief. "Of course I have, but dreams cost money, Ethan. Rent, equipment, supplies, permits. I'm just a single mom trying to keep the lights on." He looked at her, eyes steady. "What if I helped?" She blinked. "Helped? What do you mean?" "Not charity," he said quickly. "A partnership. I invest, you run it. In your name. I believe in you, Grace. In your hands." He glanced down at them, rough with faint burn marks, yet strong and steady. Grace studied him, a mix of caution and wonder in her gaze. "You don't have to do this." "Maybe not," he said softly. "But I want to. You and Lily reminded me that there's still something worth believing in. And I want to start over, not with skyscrapers, but with something that smells like cookies and laughter." The room went still. Only Lily's quiet giggles filled the air as she colored outside the lines. Grace looked at her daughter, then back at Ethan. Inside her eyes flickered something fragile, the faint light of hope she'd buried long ago. Finally, she whispered, "If you're serious, I'll do it, but only if we're equals. Partners?" Ethan nodded, smiling. "Partners," he repeated. "I promise." Lily looked up, eyes sparkling. "Mommy, are you really going to have a bakery?" Grace laughed softly, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Maybe, sweetheart, thanks to Mr. Ethan." "And if it happens," Ethan added gently, "there'll be a special corner just for you, to draw and color while your mom bakes." The little girl squealed with joy, her laughter filling the tiny kitchen. Ethan watched them, mother and daughter, light and warmth, and for the first time in years, he felt something pure, something real. Maybe it was faith, maybe it was a beginning, But whatever it was, he knew he wanted to hold on to it for as long as he could. The days that followed moved fast, as if time itself had found a new rhythm. Ever since Grace said yes, Ethan felt a kind of energy he hadn't known in years. He no longer stayed awake in silence. Instead, he woke early, picked up Grace and Lily, and together they explored every corner of Brooklyn, searching for a place to begin again. They saw dozens of spaces. Some were dark, their walls cracked and damp. Others were perfect, but way too expensive. Grace would just smile and shake her head. A few were quiet, tucked behind streets no one walked. A bakery without sunlight would be sad, Lily had sighed, and Ethan couldn't help but agree. He didn't rush. He let Grace lead, letting her decide. For him, this wasn't about the location, it was about a feeling, that sense of belonging he'd been chasing for years. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the city, they stopped at an old corner on Dean Street. A dusty glass door stood beneath a faded wooden sign that read, "Closed for renovation." Ethan pushed it open, and a soft scent of old wood and light flooded the space. Grace stepped inside, her eyes widening. The room was empty, walls aged to a pale cream, ceilings high, a large window facing the street. She took a deep breath and whispered, almost to herself, "This place smells like a new beginning." Ethan watched her, then turned to see Lily spinning in circles across the floor, her laughter echoing. He knew they'd found it. The renovations began the next day. Ethan traded his suit for a t-shirt and jeans. Grace tied her hair up, grabbed a paintbrush, while Lily claimed the role of official label designer, armed with stickers and colored pens. The three of them worked side by side, painting, cleaning, laughing. They painted the walls soft white and warm yellow. The sunlight hit the wet paint, making the whole room glow. Ethan wiped the windows while Grace teased, "Never thought I'd see a billionaire cleaning glass." He laughed, eyes glinting. "Guess I just needed someone to give me a reason." They worked until sunset, paint on their hands, dust in their hair, exhaustion in their smiles. Lily ran in circles, declaring, "I'm the bakery keeper, Mommy's the baker, and Mr. Ethan's the magician." Grace laughed. "Magician?" Lily nodded seriously. "He turned this old place into something beautiful." When night fell, they sat on the floor amid the mess, eating sandwiches and sipping water. The yellow light bathed them in warmth. Ethan leaned back against the wall, tired but at peace, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Grace looked around, her voice soft and proud. "You see it, don't you? It's going to be beautiful. I think we should call it Grace and Lily's Bakery, a place with both our names on the window." Ethan smiled. "That's perfect, because you two are the light of this place." Outside, car lights streaked like stars across the street. But inside that little shop, the real light was blooming, not from lamps or fixtures, but from laughter, hope, and hands that had finally found each other. As Lily drifted asleep on her mother's shoulder, Ethan pulled off his jacket and gently laid it over her. He looked at Grace, and in that quiet moment, he knew, for the first time in years, his life finally had a home. That morning, Brooklyn felt brighter than ever. Sunlight spilled through the spotless windows of the new bakery, glinting on the handwritten sign, "Grace and Lily's Bakery." Ethan stood outside with a small bouquet of sunflowers. Inside, Grace was adjusting trays of cookies, her hands trembling, though she tried to hide it. She glanced out nervously. "What if?" "No one comes, Ethan?" He smiled softly, his voice calm and certain. "They will, because you made this place with heart." Beside her, Lily wore a pale yellow dress and clutched a bundle of colorful flyers she'd drawn herself. "I'll tell everyone my mom makes the best cookies on the street." They both laughed. Ethan flipped the sign on the door. The little bell chimed gently. Open! The bakery was officially alive. At first, only a few people wandered in. A curious neighbor, an old woman with kind eyes, a couple of kids grabbing snacks before school. Grace greeted each one shyly, her cheeks flushed with nervous excitement. Lily danced around, handing out flyers, singing as she went. "Mommy's cookies are the best in the world." She handed one to a woman walking her dog and tugged her hand. "You should try them. They smell so good." The woman laughed, walked in, and bought one. Within minutes, the buttery scent of vanilla and sugar drifted down the street. Soon, more people followed. A young couple stopped, then a group of students, then office workers on their way to work. They took a bite and smiled. The taste was simple, comforting, and full of warmth. One by one, they came back for more. Grace could hardly believe it. She baked and served and thanked everyone with trembling joy. Her hands were dusted with flour, her hair a little messy, but her eyes, they shone brighter than anything in the shop. Ethan stayed behind the counter, wiping the glass, helping pack boxes, quietly taking it all in. It wasn't the kind of success he'd known, no champagne, no headlines, but it was real, human, and alive. By noon, sunlight poured through the curtains, filling the bakery with a golden glow. The smell of freshly baked cookies hung in the air. Lily sat by the window, drawing a new sign that read, "Thank you for visiting my mommy's bakery." Grace stopped, looking around at the bustling room, the wooden tables, the soft light, the laughter. Everything she'd dreamed of was right here, in front of her. She turned to Ethan, her voice trembling. "We did it." He met her gaze, smiled gently, and said, "Not we, Grace. You?" Her lips parted, but no words came, just a smile, and tears glinting in her eyes. She set down a tray of warm cookies, and outside, Lily ran in shouting, "Mr. Ethan, look, Mom's the best baker ever." He knelt, smiled, and whispered, "And you're the good luck charm who made it happen." The bell rang again. New customers entered, bringing more laughter, more light. And as the scent of butter and sugar filled the air, Ethan realized this was what beginning again truly smelled like. Since the bakery opened, Ethan's life had changed in ways he never expected. He still worked, but no longer spent lonely nights staring at city lights. Each morning, instead of rushing to meetings, he stopped by Grace's apartment and knocked 3 times, their little ritual. Lily was always the first to open the door, shouting, "Good morning, Mr. Ethan," before shoving a new drawing into his hand. At first, she said his name politely, almost formally, but over time the sound of it grew softer, warmer, like something that belonged at home. They had breakfast together, simple meals of toast, eggs, and warm milk. Grace would laugh watching him struggle with a butter knife while Lily chattered about school, sometimes sighing, "I hate math, Mr. Ethan." He'd grin. "Then this afternoon, I'll show you why math can be fun." Afternoons often found him at the bakery, waiting by the window for Lily after school. They'd do homework together, sharing snacks from the counter. When she looked tired, he slipped small notes into her lunchbox. Simple words like, "You did great today." "Dad's proud of you." At first, Grace thought Lily had written it wrong. But then she saw the way Lily said, "Dad," how naturally it came, and how Ethan's eyes softened each time he heard it. Without meaning to, he had become the missing piece in their lives. Their evenings were gentle and familiar. Grace cooked pasta, Lily's favorite, while Ethan set the table. They ate, laughed, traded stories, then ended the night with old movies on the small TV. Lily always fell asleep halfway through, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder, a smile still on her lips. Sometimes Grace would watch them and feel her chest tighten, not with pain, but with a happiness so fragile she hardly dared to breathe. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She simply leaned her head against his shoulder. And in that quiet room, with the faint hum of the city outside and the soft rhythm of Lily's breathing between them, neither needed words to know. They had become a family. That night, Brooklyn seemed quieter than usual. Street lights glowed faintly through the fog, spilling soft gold across the damp pavement. Inside the bakery, only Ethan and Grace remained, sitting together under the dim warmth of the cooling oven. The ticking clock blended with the rhythm of their breathing, as if time itself had paused to listen. Ethan sat in silence for a long while before he spoke, his voice rough, almost hesitant. "I was engaged once," he began. "She was beautiful, smart. Everyone said we were perfect together. But then I found out. She only wanted my money. She was pregnant, but not with my child. It was all a plan. I read every message, every detail, and that day something inside me just broke. After that, I stopped trusting people. I stopped believing in love, in kindness, in anything real." Grace didn't speak. She just reached out and took his hand. Her palm was small and warm, steady in its gentleness. "You don't have to prove anything," she whispered. "We've already seen who you really are. Not the billionaire, not the man who's been hurt, but the man who's learned how to love again." He looked at her, his eyes glimmering. "You and Lily taught me that. You showed me how to love, not with reason, but with heart. I thought that part of me was gone forever." They sat quietly for a moment, surrounded by the faint sweetness of baked bread and the hum of the sleeping city. Then Ethan leaned in and kissed her, softly, almost shyly, a kiss that wasn't about passion, but about peace, forgiveness, and beginning again. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Lily came running into the kitchen shouting, "Daddy, Ethan!" Ethan laughed, dropped to one knee, and took her tiny hands. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice trembling. "I want to ask you something. Would you let me be your dad? For real?" Lily's eyes widened. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "You already are, Daddy. You've been my dad in here all along." Grace stood beside them, tears glistening as she smiled through them. And in that small kitchen, wrapped in the smell of vanilla and sunlight, a family was born, not by blood, but by choice, by love. Months passed. Grace and Lily's bakery became a beloved corner of the neighborhood. Everyone knew the kind man behind the counter, the one who always smiled, who helped sweep the floor, who listened when someone needed to talk. No one imagined he had once been a lonely billionaire behind glass walls. At night, their home glowed with quiet joy. Grace cooked dinner, Lily told stories about school, Ethan set the table. Afterward, they curled up on the couch. Lily fell asleep in his arms. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from the child's face and whispered, half to himself, "Once I had everything money could buy, but now I have everything that truly matters." Outside, the bakery's golden light spilled softly onto the street, like a beacon of warmth in the dark, a reminder that kindness, once given, always finds its way home.